So this is how my bookshelf is looking now compared to the last time I filmed. Sorry if you can hear my dog's footsteps. He's walking around. So I don't really know how much I changed from the last time I filmed, but I definitely did a little bit more reorganizing, and a couple more books have come into my possession since the last time I did my bookshelf video as well. And I also got a couple of different little trinkets to decorate with, and there's actually more books than this, but there's not enough room on the shelf to keep them all, so I took sort of my least favorite of all that were sitting out here and I just put them away under here. So under here I have Swiss Family Robinson and a couple of Nancy Drew books and I think one or two others, but I kept the books that I'm kind of the most excited to read out on the shelf, and I do intend to get another bookshelf at some point in time. So this is what the bookshelf is looking like now. I think it looks really pretty. I absolutely love looking at the shelf. It brings me a lot of joy, and I love also that I just have this repertoire of books to choose from to read. I like having a little home library, and it took me a little while to figure out what I wanted and to shop around for what I wanted, and I went to physical bookstores, I went to secondhand and used bookstores, I went online, I watched a lot of YouTube videos, I did a lot of research, I looked at a lot of top 50 lists and top 100 lists, and kind of then tweaked it a little bit to suit me and my person and the type of thing I like. And some of the books that were there were TV shows that I watched when I was younger that were based on the books that had a lot of sentimental value. There's also a book here that was gifted to me from my daughter. And then I also kind of went with like just what spoke to me. If I saw any pretty covers. When I'm book shopping, aside from looking for specific titles, sometimes I'll just keep my eyes open for what looks like a really pretty spine or a pretty book, and then I'll read the synopsis, and if it sounds at all interesting, I will grab it. One example is this one here. This one just looked really beautiful, and when I picked it up and read the back, I thought, you know what, that sounds really nice. And then I read a couple of pages and I thought that it sounded really lovely, and so I added it into my collection. I think it's beautiful and I'm very excited to read it. So I do have some books that are a little bit more like less thoroughly thought out, I guess. And then I have some that were very, very intentionally picked, and I specifically sought after that book or that type of edition or whatever. And I also have other books that are multiples of like different editions of the same story, because even though I haven't read them yet, something tells me I'm going to love them. One example is Little Women. So I have a couple of different copies of Little Women. This is one that recently came into my possession. I got this one from Poshmark actually, and it is a beautiful illustrated version of Little Women. There's all these pretty illustrations throughout. And some of them are color, some of them are not. But I just thought that this was going to be, I have a feeling this is going to be a favorite story of mine. I just can't wait to read it. So I'm excited to read that. So this is one example of a book that I have multiple editions of. But today is not a day for talking about all the books I've recently come into acquisition of. It is to share with you guys all the books I read in July. And I never thought that I would be standing here saying these are all the books I read in July, because I actually didn't think I was capable of reading more than one book in a month. Because just in the last few years, I just haven't felt like I've had the time, or maybe I wasn't able to dedicate my senses to reading books because I was so distracted and pulled in a million directions by other things that were going on in my life. As you guys know, if you watch my channel, 2024 was a really stressful year for me, a really hard year, and I just had so much on my plate in the last like 4 or 5 years that I guess I never dedicated any real time to reading, and it has been such a rewarding thing to get into in the month of July, and I'm proud to say that I have read 4 classic books in the last 2 weeks, albeit not all of them were very long. 2 or 3 of them I would say are quite short. One of them was very short. It was a short story, and then the other one was a longer story. But in any case, I'm pretty happy to say that I was able to read 4 classic books in the last 2 weeks. I'm going to show you guys what those are and share with you my quick thoughts on them as well, and then I want to pick out some TBR for August, and hopefully this will be something I will do monthly. Come back to you guys after the end of the month, share with you what books I read, my thoughts on them, and then choose TBR for the following month as just something I really like to do. So before we get into that, I want to share with you just a couple little knickknacks that I have on my shelf. So this here is a little bunny figurine that I got actually from Poshmark. Just a little figurine. I thought it was really cute. As I told you guys, I'm kind of a little bit obsessed with bunnies for some reason, and I really like that bunnies and rabbits seem to be center in a lot of like fairy tales and a lot of stories. And I'm also really excited to read this book here, Watership Down by Richard Adams, which obviously is about bunnies. But I just thought that this little figurine would be a cute little addition. It's a little mama rabbit with a bunch of baby rabbits. And then I decided to use these really old renditions from the Bronte sisters as kind of like decor, because they're very old and a couple of them are not in the greatest repair, and I don't really want to read them and ruin them. But I have Violet, Wuthering Heights, and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. And there's a couple of other stories in there as well. These books are over 100 years old. So they're beautiful. They've got the gilded edges. So they're very old and they're very delicate. And I don't have them because I want to read them. If I want to read something like, I would like to read Violet, so I'll get a different copy of Violet. So I've used them as decor rather than having them sit as part of my actual shelf. So I do want to say as well that obviously I'm not an English lit major. I am not in any way an expert on classic literature or any literature for that matter. I'm just somebody who used to read a lot when I was younger. I loved reading. I used to get so much enjoyment from reading. And then I think when I went to university, ever since university on, I kind of gave up reading anything other than like university books. And I read only what I needed to for my studies. And I read a ton of nursing and whatever I needed for my degree. And that's kind of what I've been focusing on for years. And of course, I've had other little hobbies like my perfumes and stuff like that. But getting back into reading is something I've always really wanted to do. I just, for some reason, never dedicated the time. And I had read quite a few classics in my past as well, but there were so many that I wanted to read. And I'm really glad that I've started this journey because, yeah, I've kind of had a nice little taste of some of the classics that were on my list. I actually just finished reading one of the books that I really wanted to read so badly. It was on my list to read for like 2 or 3 years, and I'm really glad that I read it. So without further ado, as I said, this is not me critiquing books. I am not an expert when it comes to classic literature. This is not me giving an expert analysis or anything like that. So take my thoughts and opinions with a grain of salt. I'm also very new to a lot of classic literature. There are so many books that I have not read. For example, I haven't read any Jane Austen yet. That is definitely on my TBR for this year. I definitely want to read at least one Jane Austen this year. I have only read one Hemingway book to date. I've never read Dostoevsky, and there's a lot of like modern classics that I have yet to read as well. But yeah, so with that being said, let me share with you guys what I read and what my thoughts were on them. And we're going to start with my least favorite, and I'll save my favorites for last, and I'll kind of just give you some thoughts. I'm going to avoid spoilers. So if you haven't read these books, I'm going to do my best to tell you my thoughts about these books without giving any sort of spoilers as well. Okay, so one of the books that I just recently finished, and I think it was the second one that I chose to read, and I read this about 2 weeks ago. Like I said, I was actually really proud of myself that I was able to finish 4 classic books in 2 weeks, because my goal going forward is going to be to try to read 1 book every week. And if you want, I can do a video talking about how I've been able to do that, because I'm actually super busy and I kind of felt like I had no time to read, but that's not the case. I just needed to make time. But one of the books that I just read is nothing too special or too crazy, I don't think. This is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. So I wanted to read this book because it was a short one. It seemed like it was going to be fairly simple. It's Hemingway, obviously. It's one of the most well-known classics of all time. I had seen that it got good reviews. I'm not particularly interested in fishing or the ocean, although I do like reading about the ocean and I do love swimming in the ocean and things like that. But this particular type of synopsis didn't really grab my attention. I just thought, you know what, let's just read it. It looks digestible. It looks fairly simple to get through, fairly easy to get through, and a pretty easy classic to start with in terms of the language that's used and the prose and the terminology and stuff like that. So honestly, I've come up with a scale to rate the books that I've read, and this one I would put in the meh category, or the it's okay. I honestly just wanted to get through it. Thankfully, it was really easy to read. It was an okay story. Parts of it were very endearing. I did like a little bit of the character development and stuff like that, but honestly, it's not like a story that gripped me. And I kind of found myself thinking for a second, if this is what all the rest of the classics are going to be like, then I'm not that thrilled. I think I just was expecting a little bit more than the story, although I can see, it's an interesting story. And it does have some poignant little moments of philosophy in there that make you think about certain things in life. And I did like the relationship between the man and the boy. And it was an okay story, but yeah, I wasn't like, wow, by it or anything. It wasn't one that just gripped me and left me thinking like, oh my gosh, wow, it's such a great book. Like, yeah, so it was just okay, but I'm glad that I got through it. Like I told you guys in a couple of my other videos, I wanted to choose a few books to start out with for my classic reading that were going to be fairly simple to read, that wouldn't scare me away, wouldn't be too difficult or too intimidating. I didn't want to start out reading like Don Quixote or War and Peace or Les Miserables or something like that was going to be a big challenge and potentially scare me away from reading. I wanted something simple, quick, easy, a little bland, and this one kind of fit the bill. So I read it. It wasn't the greatest thing I've ever read. I do have other Hemingway books here. I have A Movable Feast and Farewell to Arms, and I think Farewell to Arms is going to be on my TBR for the fall. And I hope and I think that I will really enjoy that book a little bit better. The next two books that I read are on this shelf, which is actually one of my favorite shelves on my bookshelf. When I was arranging the bookshelf, I was trying to arrange it based on color scheme. And also I wanted to put books together that made me happy to look at them and books that I thought I would love to read. So there's some outliers on this shelf that I'm not really sure that I'll like to read, like maybe A Tale of Two Cities. I don't know how I'm going to feel about that one. I don't really know about the Tess of the D'Urberville book by Thomas Hardy. I've never read any Thomas Hardy. That is definitely going to be on TBR for the fall, though. I would like to read at least one work from Thomas Hardy. But anyways, in a nutshell, I think this bookshelf is so beautiful. This particular shelf, I love it. I love the flowers. I love the colors of the books. I love some of the authors that are on here. On the shelf, I have Gone with the Wind. I've got all of my Jane Austens. One rendition of Little Women. I've got Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And I also have The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And I have two other books on here. One that I just put here because it's quite pretty, and the other one because it is a beloved short story. So let me tell you about the next book that I read and my thoughts on it. And again, this one was a little bit random, and that would be Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So the reason that I read this one is because I literally was in the city and I was shopping and I went to HomeSense and I found, of course, a few classics. And this one just looked really pretty. It was one that wasn't even really on my radar. And I just quickly looked it up and looked up a couple of excerpts and thought that sounds like it has some profound philosophy in it, and I thought, why not grab it and read it? So I took it home, and upon opening it, I realized that it was going to be fairly simple to read as well, because it didn't have a whole lot of script on the pages. It was fairly broken apart. As you can see, I do have quite a lot of annotations here on the side. I bought some annotation tabs, and I did highlight and annotate some of my favorite quotes. Just as an example, you can see that it is fairly broken up, so it was pretty simple to read because it wasn't super congested in terms of like how much verbiage was on each of the pages. So I actually whipped through this pretty fast. I actually read that book in about 2.5, 3 days. So Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is a little bit more philosophical. It's basically just thoughts, and if I can say, I feel like the author was rather obsessed with life and death and the finiteness of life. I found it to be a little bit of a depressing read, although there was a lot of really profound and truthful quotes in here. You know, I can think of many instances in my life when that applies, and I can think of ways to apply those thoughts to my own life, and it gives you a different perspective on certain things. And I actually really, really enjoyed a lot of what was in this book. However, like I said, I did find it to be very preoccupied with like the meaning of life and how to come to terms with the fact that life is finite and that we are mortal and that wherever you come from, there too shall you end up. And it was a little bit depressing, to be honest, especially I think just because there was a lot of things going on in my own life, and I work in palliative care, and then somebody very close to me had somebody in their family pass away in the midst while I was reading it. And so I think just in general, my mental state was not in a place where I wanted to read about that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was very profound, and I think it's something I would like to come back and look at. I can't say that I thoroughly enjoyed it, though. Again, I would give this one like a 2.5 stars out of 5, because although it had a lot of profound, poignant, meaningful moments throughout the book that I enjoyed and that I thought, wow, that's actually quite profound, and I highlighted it, it wasn't something that I like really enjoyed reading. I found it deeper and more interesting than The Old Man and the Sea. I do like some philosophical books. Actually, a lot of the books that I read in the earlier parts of my 20s were all philosophy. They were all like self-help philosophy kind of books. I have read a lot of Eckhart Tolle, Wayne Dyer, that kind of thing. And that kind of stuff really sticks with you because it does give you a different perception on life, and it gives you a different perception on the things that you choose to focus on and the things that you perceive as being important, what really matters in life, what makes a human, and those kind of things. So I do like philosophy, but I can't say that I find it super engaging and exciting and a story that like obviously draws me in and makes me want to see what's going to happen and fully engages me and excites me or draws some sort of emotion from me. Whereas a couple of the other books that I read did touch me in those ways and did draw some emotion from me or make me feel a certain way. I do prefer sometimes fiction or like stories that are loosely based on nonfiction, because I like to get to know characters, and I like to be moved, and I like to feel like I sympathize with characters or empathize with characters. I like to feel like maybe I see little bits of myself in people in the characters or bits of the rest of the world, and I like to form a relationship with characters, and there wasn't really any of that in this book. So I didn't find it like super wow amazing. And again, these are just my thoughts. There's probably people out there who think The Old Man and the Sea and this book are like the greatest ever, but I definitely wouldn't put them on the top of my amazement list in terms of what I've read this month. So I was happy to have had it done. Again, it was pretty easy to get through. Some decent little points in there that were worth highlighting, but not something that I was like, wow. The next book that I read, and this is one that I've wanted to read for a really long time, and again, I wanted something that was going to be relatively short, quick, easy to digest, although actually, despite the shortness of the book, it wasn't that easy to digest because you needed a lot of historical context, and it was actually a rather deep, insightful story, despite being very short. And if you haven't figured it out already based on the color of the book, that would be The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So, okay, where do I begin with this one? So this one I read, actually I think this was like maybe the second, might have been the second or third. Actually, this might have been the second one that I read. And this story, so I didn't have any of the historical context about this story. I didn't really know what exactly the woman was suffering from in the story. Again, I'm going to try not to give any spoilers. But when I was reading it, I at first assumed maybe she had like bipolar or schizophrenia or something like that. And then there's little clues and stuff that obviously clue you into that it was actually postpartum depression that she had. However, I didn't actually realize that until after I was done reading the story. I still found it a really interesting, engaging story to read, actually, because it really had you playing a little bit of detective, trying to figure out what was going on and piecing together all the little bits that she was talking about and putting together this image in your mind of what was going on and trying to figure out what she was seeing and what she was feeling and how beautifully the author described certain things in the book. So I found it really engaging and really interesting, even though I didn't fully understand like the historical context or know exactly what this was based about. After the fact, when I did a little bit of research on it and I looked up a little bit of the context, and I realized that there was this thing in the Victorian era called the rest cure, which was basically women who had any sort of neurological disorder and were depressed or had postpartum depression or anything like that. They were given what was called the rest cure, which was essentially to be kind of locked away from society and not given any sort of intellectual stimulation at all, like not being able to read or engage with other people or even really leave the place that they were in. They were sort of confined to an area to get better, so to speak. And it really speaks to the rudimentary knowledge that they had of neurologic conditions in people and of mental health, and also of women's rights or the lack thereof. So once I realized that this was something that was quite common and that I didn't even know that this thing existed called the rest care, once I realized that, and once I realized that this woman had postpartum depression, it really just was a wow moment for me, because then when I looked back in the book, and I actually, even when I was reading parts of the book, there were so many parts that stood out to me. Also, the fact that the woman in the book, her husband is a doctor. My partner is also a physician, and so I had a lot of parallels to this woman. I actually experienced postpartum depression with both my children, and I actually struggle with something called PMDD, which I've talked about in lots of my other videos. And PMDD is obviously a hormonal-based neurologic illness that affects many women. And there were so many parts in this book that I related to, like when she was saying, you know, my husband doesn't believe that I'm sick, or talking about how other people didn't understand what she was going through. Just a lot of, like, I kind of want to reread it again because I've forgotten some of the little quotes, but there was a lot of moments in there where I felt so strongly like, wow, I know what this woman is going through. It just drew a lot of parallels for me, and some things that I went through and some feelings that I felt. And I just think it's so interesting how times have changed, and how now we're so aware. We have such an awareness of like women's mental health, and we have people to advocate for that. But in this woman's time, they didn't have the advocates for that, and they had to kind of suffer in silence and also be sort of gaslit into thinking, oh, they weren't really that sick and it was all in their head. And it really just drew a lot of parallels for me, because people who don't suffer from PMDD, or people who don't have ovaries, men will never understand, or people who don't struggle with mental illness will never understand what really goes on in the mind of somebody who does struggle with mental illness. And so, yeah, this book just really spoke to me and was very meaningful for me, especially after the research I did. I was sort of like, had this mind blown, like, aha moment, so profound. And I would like to come back and reread this story, maybe in a few months, maybe in a year, just to see if my appreciation of it or understanding of it is different, because I already enjoyed it so much. Even with my like very beginner's exposure to all of the classics, I still really, really enjoyed it. And so for somebody like me who's so new to it, if I can find that much enjoyment out of it, then I feel like it really speaks to that it must be a poignant piece of work. So I really enjoyed this one, and if I had to give it a rating out of 5, I would give it probably like a 4.5. Just because it wasn't like, oh my gosh, favorite thing I've ever read, you know. It's not like in God tier category for me, but I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And as you can see, I do have quite a few little highlights and annotations here as well. One of the quotes that I highlighted here says, "I cry at nothing and cry most of the time." And let's just say I know what it's like to cry at nothing and cry most of the time. To hear somebody illustrate in a story something I'd gone through myself that was so hard-hitting and so close and similar to things I had been through was huge. Like, obviously, you know that there's people out there who struggle with the same thing that you struggle with, or there's other people out there who had postpartum depression, or there's people out there who have PMDD, but to read on paper words from a woman written so long ago that literally mirror things that you have thought yourself was quite profound for me. I just was like, wow. And this was even before I even knew what it was exactly that she was struggling with. But then once I figured out what it was, I was like, even more so, because anyways. So just a meaningful book, like really, really important, I think. Yeah, so I really enjoyed it. Again, it wasn't like greatest book I've ever read, super in love with it. I feel like the books that I'm going to love the most will be the ones that have stories or characters, or I don't know, either they're going to be feel-good books or they're going to be just super sad books. I feel like those are the ones I'm going to enjoy the most, which leads me to my next one. And the last book that I read in July, and the one that I just finished reading, and my favorite that I have given 5 stars to, my first 5-star classic since I've started this journey, my latest journey with books, is none other than Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So, as you can see, I have a ton of annotations. I annotated the heck out of this book. The way that I like to annotate is I highlight things that are either profound, beautiful, or important to the story, something that I think I might want to come back to and reference later. And sometimes I even highlight, underline, and annotate stuff that I don't fully understand. For example, if there's a word that I'm not familiar with, which with a lot of these classics, there's a lot of words that we don't use very commonly today, or there's words that have a different meaning today than they had then. And so anytime there was something that I was like, oh, I don't really know what that means, or I'm not really sure what they mean by that, I would highlight it, underline it, look it up, and then I would make a little note about it so that I fully understood. I wanted to fully understand what I was reading in the book. I didn't want to just glaze over it and skim through it and kind of get a vague understanding of what was going on. I think that's why sometimes it takes longer to read and enjoy classics, and I can see that I'm going to have to do a lot of that with some other classics that are more difficult to read. This one was actually fairly easy to read. There was just like a little bit of language that wasn't super familiar to me. So this book, you guys, my thoughts on it. I literally just finished it this morning, and in no particular order, here are my thoughts. So this was the type of story that I would say the first like 20 to 30 pages weren't that exciting. I was like, okay, it wasn't that exciting. It didn't pull me in. It wasn't super engaging. Then once the story really picked up and I started to see exactly what the plot was and what the main character was doing, then it really grabbed my attention. Then of course, so many things unfold throughout the story. My favorite chapter, if you have read it, I won't spoil it for you, but my favorite chapter is chapter 11. And that is where we learn from the viewpoint of the wretch, so-called in the book, or the monster or the demon that is created by Victor Frankenstein. We get to hear from his perspective everything that he's gone through, and his perspective being this creation, and what it's like to be him, and the fact that he really does have so much humanity within himself, but nobody will accept that of him and sees him as nothing more than a monster. And that because of that, he can't get any consolation on earth, any sympathy, any empathy, any relationships, and is ultimately just so lonely. It was absolutely heartbreaking, honestly, like absolutely heartbreaking. I felt horrible for him. It was during chapter 11 that I decided I wanted to watch the movie, because I know there's a lot of different adaptations. I had never really heard the story of Frankenstein. I didn't really know what it was about, and I've never seen any of the movies, which I think was actually to my benefit, because I was able to really piece together in my head what I thought the characters might look like and what the creation himself might have looked like. And I think it's sometimes nice to do that. Sometimes when you see movies, it changes. It gives you a little bit too much imagery to go off of, and it kind of sometimes ruins the original story a little bit. But now after having watched this, you guys, I'm so excited because I found out that there's going to be another Frankenstein come out in 2025, directed by Guillermo del Toro, and it's going to be coming out November of this year, and I'm going to go see it in theaters, and I'm so stoked because I actually fell in love with the wretch, as they call him in the book. Something else that I thought was interesting was, and this might be really naive of me and kind of show the extent of my literary expertise, but I did not realize that Frankenstein was not the monster, and that Frankenstein is actually Victor Frankenstein, the person who creates the monster. I didn't know that. I always thought Frankenstein was Frankenstein, the guy with the bolt in his neck. But yeah, it was interesting so that was another confusing part. Like, that would have been a benefit to where it would have been good for me to see the movie ahead of time, so that coming into the story, I was less confused, because I fully thought Frankenstein was the monster, but turns out it was the creator. And then, yeah, everything that took place in the book, I really just felt so horrible for the wretch, as they called him. And I was disappointed in the ending. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I was disappointed in the ending. I was really hoping for a different ending than what happened. And I really wanted nothing more than for the wretch to find happiness. And so I was really sad by the ending. I was left feeling like let down a little bit. Nonetheless, it was an incredible story, and I can see why it has withstood the test of time, and I can see why so many people love this book. It actually blows my mind that the author was only 19 years old when she wrote this, and it blows my mind that this was written like 150 years ago, because these days, to listen to 19-year-olds talk, they can barely form full sentences, let alone come up with some of the beautiful writing that is in this book. I highlighted so many beautiful moments, and just the way that the author describes certain things, especially scenery, the sun and the trees and the mountains, and listening to the wretch talk about himself just was so moving and so profound and so beautiful. There were so many pieces in this book, actually, that I thought, I've been there. I have felt what this person has felt. When they talk about certain characters wanting to retreat into nature to find themselves any sort of solace and reprieve from the pain and the agony that they were feeling. Yeah, again, to hear your own feelings and things that you've been through mirrored in the writing of somebody else who's going through something completely different, but yet feels the same emotions that you were feeling. And it wasn't just the wretch, it was actually lots of different characters. Yeah, just really, really moving, like a great book. So I fully enjoyed this one. And I really like how the story was written, how it starts out with letters and ends with letters. But yeah, that's about all I'm going to say about it. Just a masterpiece. I mean, so good, so beyond its time, and not too hard to read either, being that it was first published in the late 1800s. I thought it was going to be a lot more difficult, and it was actually a lot more digestible, but I did have to look up quite a few words. But beautiful book. I loved it. This is a 5-star for me. And this is the type of book that I like to read because it not only keeps me engaged and wanting to continue reading more of it, but also has me fall in love a little bit and feel something for some of the characters. And I really just felt so bad for the wretch, and I wanted to hug him. And I was like, you can come be my friend. I'll be your friend. So that is Frankenstein, the last book, and I will consider this a July read, even though I finished reading it today, which is August 4th. One of my favorite quotes from the book is actually one that's highlighted in this painted edition, and it says, "Life, although it may be only an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. Remember, thou hast made me more powerful than thyself. My height is superior to thine, my joints more supple. But I will not be tempted to set myself in opposition to thee. I am thy creature, and I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt also perform thy part, which thou owest me." Just, yeah, such a beautiful book. And there's so many beautiful quotes in here, like that one. I just endless. I found myself just annotating literally something on almost every single page. So this is kind of the fun part. Now I get to go through and pick what I want to read for August. So August is obviously still very much summer, but it is coming to a close. It is coming closer to fall, and I'm so excited for fall reading because I have some really good, dark, sort of gothic books that I want to read in the fall. But we're still in the summertime, and I want to read something that's cozy and maybe a little more appropriate for summertime. And I also want to read a book that has been on my book wish list or to read list for a long time that I think I'm going to really enjoy. And that is going to be definitely Little Women. So I have wanted to read Little Women forever, and I think I'm going to pick out 3 books. I think that picking 3 longer-ish classics is a good idea. And then if I get through those 3 and want to read another, I'll choose another. But definitely Little Women is on that list. My second TBR. Do I want to read another Bronte sister? I feel like I kind of almost want to read another Bronte sister, but I also want to read another... I don't know. This is hard. I have to sit here and look at this for a second because I kind of want to read another Hemingway, but then I'm like, do I really want to do that? I just finished reading Hemingway, and I didn't love The Old Man and the Sea. I hear that The Little Prince is a good book. I think it's like a children's book, but I hear that it's really good. I think this would be a good one. It's also like a little shorter, maybe faster and easier to get through. So maybe I should put this on my TBR. And I also definitely want to read a Jane Austen. And I think what better Jane Austen to start out with than the OG Pride and Prejudice? I feel like that is the one that I should start with. So I don't have a great like Penguin or Oxford Classic version of Pride and Prejudice. I have this gigantic edition. I have this little edition, and that's it. So I guess maybe this one. I definitely need to read a Jane Austen for sure. So I think I will read this beautiful version of Pride and Prejudice. So we will add that Pride and Prejudice and Little Women. Do I want to do The Little Prince? I'm actually like second guessing. Maybe I'll save that one. I'll save that one for another time. I feel like honestly, if I was to get through Pride and Prejudice and Little Women in August, I would be a happy woman. I'm just taking another quick look to see if there's anything else that I want to dig out. Maybe something a little more simple, something with maybe some more simple language, something easy to digest, like The Secret Garden. Farewell to Arms, that's also a nice contender. I feel like The Secret Garden, or maybe like Marilla of Green Gables. But I think if I start reading Green Gables, I should read all the Green Gables. So I think I'll save those. So I actually think I want to read a Virginia Woolf. So I think I will maybe grab Mrs. Dalloway, because this one isn't as long, and I've never read anything from Virginia Woolf, and I would really like to see what her writing is all about. Apparently, there's like a whole cult of people who are just obsessed with Virginia Woolf's writing, and I think this would be, you know, not too long, a little bit more digestible to read. So I think that's what I will start out with. And there we have it. This is my TBR for August. So I'm really, really excited. I'm not sure which one I want to start out with. Honestly, I don't know. I think what I'll do is I'll just read the first page of each one evening and just see where my heart takes me and which one I want to continue reading. But yeah, this looks like such a beautiful reading month. I'm so excited. And like I said, my goal was to read one book per week, but because a couple of these are a little bit longer, and I feel like Jane Austen might take me a little bit longer to get through just because of some of the language and stuff like that, I feel like this is a pretty good, pretty realistic TBR for the month of August. And like I said, I'll be a very happy woman if I actually get through all of these in August. I'm trying not to put too much pressure on myself, but what I've started doing is reading a little bit in the evenings and then also in the morning instead of going on YouTube in the morning while I have breakfast, which was what I was doing. I still like a little bit of YouTube and I still check my Instagram and stuff like that. But instead of just doing that, I now try to read a little bit in the morning. So yeah, I literally read Frankenstein in like 4 days. So I can't see why I can't get through these 3 for the month of August. And then if I do, I'll grab something else to read on top of it. So yeah, if you were going to start out reading either of these books, which one would you recommend first? And if you have read any of these books, which one was your favorite? And I'd also like to know your thoughts on Frankenstein, The Yellow Wallpaper, Meditations if you've read it, and also The Old Man and the Sea, which I feel like The Old Man and the Sea like pales in comparison to all of the rest of the books I'm talking about, but no shade to Hemingway. I'm looking forward to reading more Hemingway. But yeah, there's my TBR for August.